I'm standing here today with Mr. Aaravindan Neelakandan, and he has been doing some very, very interesting research on the frontiers of science and consciousness. So today he's going to talk to us about his understanding of organic and inorganic intelligence. That is natural and artificial intelligence, to put it in another way. So over to you, Mr. Aaravindan.
Basically, my understanding of the connectivity between the so-called organic and the inorganic comes from the works of Acharya Jagdish Chandra Bose, an Indian scientist who lived in the late 19th and early 20th century. And basically his work, particularly he was doing science in colonial India, and that science defied the frontiers of or the categorical boxes of establishment science of that time. And the insight that he has given us is basically this: the intelligence is a kind of a fluid thing that connects the inorganic, the organic, the plant and the animal and the so-called higher mammals, and it connects them all in a kind of a, you can just imagine a kind of a fluid that flows and connects through all these different structures. It is kind of a stream that is going underneath them in an invisible way. Now, when we think about it, he showed these things in the form of his instruments, through the recordings of his instruments, and when he showed these instruments, he broke the barrier between physics and physiology. And he was not getting himself caught in the traps of mechanistic or idealist monisms. Rather, he was showing that the diverse phenomena have a unitary process. You can say that he is a kind of a process scientist, a kind of a Vedantic process scientist in modern times, perhaps the first scientist of that type in modern times. And let us think about intelligence coming out of a particular phenomenon and spreading through an example. Consider the root system of the plants. Now we know that the roots of the plants, they actually communicate with each other, with the different plant root systems. And how this communication happens, it happens through a lot of biochemicals that are passed on, and a kind of ionic potentials that get developed inside the soil. The soil becomes, at that particular point of time, when the two root systems are interacting, the soil also becomes intelligent. It develops capacity for cognition. So basic cognition happens at the root level and between the two root systems. So what happens here? You have two plants and you have soil. Soil we consider as a kind of a substratum and nothing more than that. Even from an ecological point of view, you can consider it as a kind of a dynamic substratum with a lot of microorganisms working here and there. Now think about this. This creates an intelligence because of the interaction of the roots. So this connectivity of the roots and the soil, it forms the intelligence. So intelligence is not something that is an epiphenomenon, it is an involuted phenomenon that manifests itself when the correct circumstances and the correct ingredients come together. And this can happen again and again and again at different levels. So, for example, let us take a science fiction scenario. We always, when we think of artificial intelligence or when we think of an alien intelligence, we think of it in this pristine environments of the laboratory. But we all know that the gut microbes, because of their synchronized movement, they are able to create their own intelligence. We know that. Now it is very clear that it can interact with your brain, and the gut almost operates as a brain.
That's right.
We know that. Now think of a biogas plant. What is a biogas plant? Biogas plant is essentially a reconstruction of an intestine, and it also contains microorganisms. Now imagine these microorganisms developing an intelligence, and it exhibits itself in the form of a flame. Now the flame becomes intelligent because the biomethanation plant or the biogas plant has these microorganisms which function as like gut bacteria. We don't have an instance of this, but this is a very real possibility of intelligence emanating from completely what we may consider as inorganic or just organic but non-life things. So these are all examples where intelligence can come in very strange places, naturally.
Right.
But now we have to take this to the concept of artificial intelligence.
Right.
Now we will find that it is almost this kind of intelligence that comes up in another one setting, in the form of chips and algorithms and other things. It is not the chips and algorithms, the computations that create the intelligence. Rather, the intelligence finds them as a receptacle for itself to manifest.
Right.
So that is how we have to see this.
Right. That's a really different way of looking at intelligence, especially artificial intelligence, because currently the human understanding is obviously that we are creating these, the intelligence ourselves. So what you're saying is that intelligence is a manifestation of a sort of, ecosystem or a structure that is it's a self-creating structure which is happening naturally, So that's a very interesting way of looking at the entire thing. So that's very fascinating. And are there any authors or any books or any suggested reading that you can
very
suggest?
interesting person. One has to watch his lectures. His lectures are there in YouTube, and he takes a very beautiful way of looking at the whole thing. And it's Donald Hoffman.
Okay.
So what Donald Hoffman says is that when you look at the entire world around you, they are like computer interface. Now you know what happens when you click a particular icon on a computer interface. Right? It's very easy for you.
Right.
But you also know that there is something very complicated happening behind it.
Right.
But if that particular complicated thing is given to you, then you may not even look at it again because it's so boring or you cannot understand it, whatever.
Right.
But if it is an icon and you can click it, then it is very easy for you. You don't have to worry about what are the processes that are happening. And the icons, they don't represent the reality behind the code. They represent only the interface reality. They don't represent the actual kernel reality. What he says is that the entire universe is like that. And more you develop the capacity to interact, more you will be able to penetrate the interface and actually interact with the kernel process. With certain things, it will be very easy for you to interact. For example, if it is your pet dog, you will be able to very easily understand that he has consciousness. Your pet cat, it will be very easy for you. But what about an amoeba? What about a small insect?
Right.
So, with that, to understand what actually they represent, what is the actual processes that go behind you.
Right.
For that, either the reality has to allow yourself, or you have to develop the tools. You have to develop that cognitive, empathy-based tools and the ability to understand to realize that. So, this is a very interesting thing that he says. And for me, basically, when I look at the different researches that have been happening in science, one thing is very interesting, very clear. It is that more we become empathy-filled, more we understand that the so-called non-human animals have more intelligence, more self-cognition, more empathy even. For example, once upon a time we used to think of insects as nothing more than kind of a carbon-based automaton. Now we know that the insects have the ability to count.
Yeah.
The insects have the ability of understanding pain and pleasure. The insects have the ability of self-recognition, something we used to relegate only for ourselves.
Right.
The same thing goes for octopus. They have the ability of problem solving. So once we used to think that empathy is the thing that divides us and the other non-human animals. Now we know that the non-human primates, they show strong empathy. So the point is, more we become empathy filled, our science evolves tools to understand the empathy and understand the similar nature of other organisms.
Right.
So this is something that is very important when we do intelligence studies, when we do consciousness studies.
That's a very interesting point you said about microbes and amoeba, that there is obviously intelligence at a very microbial level as well. If I take this a step further, just an analogy, that wherever there is life or wherever there's prana, as we call it, there's going to be intelligence, right? And now if I come back to the works of Sri Jagdish Chandra Bose, who also, and this is something that I did not note recently, that he also experimented with metals. And he showed how, given the same stimuli, like I think he even experimented with alcohol, the same electromagnetic signature that is happening in a human brain when they consume alcohol is the same electromagnetic signature that is showing, I think, in plants and in metals when they are being exposed to alcohol. And the same thing happens with heat, stress, and everything. And he has made these measurements, he's created all these, graphs and everything. So you can see that there are these signatures, but this is lesser known part of his work. So my question is that if we take this analogy, that wherever there is life or prana, there is intelligence. Basically, wherever we can record an electromagnetic signature of activity that is happening, can we make this assumption, which could be in the future perhaps scientifically tested, that there is actually an intelligence that is inherent in even inert matter, like in metals or other things which we are considering to be non-living? So what is your opinion on this?
Basically, in a way, people like John Wheeler, they have already talked about this, that consciousness being part of matter at its very basic elementary particle level. And when they talk about the participatory universe, where the matter itself comes because of the interaction of consciousness with whatever that is there. And so, yes, intelligence is there at the very basis, and it is not this anthropomorphic intelligence, the intelligence as we understand. It is, we are just a small tip of this vast intelligence that is there, and that intelligence is something that we can never understand in its entirety through our cognitive skills that are given to us. So it is possible at the level of from a quark to quasar to a galaxy, we may be looking at this intelligent systems at each and every level. When we develop the ability to understand them, when we develop the language, the even mathematical models, when we develop them properly, then we will be able to understand that they exhibit a kind of a cognitive capacity. They exhibit a kind of intelligence which aggregate and evolves into these myriad forms of various intelligences.
Very interesting. And I think there was this quote by Sri Jagdish Chandra Bose, and maybe you can mention that as on a closing note. I think where he had mentioned about how there is a basic unity of all life forces. Can you just
processes,
tell
all
us
the life
that?
processes.
It's a beautiful quote.
And he said that, particularly in his 1902 lecture at the Royal Society, where the people were hostile, basically. Most of the physiologists were hostile. And he showed that there is unity, there is oneness between all these different barriers that we have created. And I am paraphrasing essentially. And the truth belongs to only a person who understands this, who seeks this unity. The truth belongs to only him, not to none else. And that is a very, very emphatic, strong way of saying that seeking this unitary process, not rather unity, I would say that seeking this unitary process behind the diverse phenomenon, that forms the basis of science, the true science, deeper science. So that is what Jagdish Chandra Bose emphasized, and he in fact said that this has been said by my ancestors in the Ganges, the river, banks of the river Ganges, 3,000 years ago.
3,000 years ago. That's beautiful. And just one last question that I have for you. Can you tell us a little bit about the Sanskrit word mahat, which I think is called the intelligence, like the universal intelligence. So can you tell us a little and how we can understand whatever discussions we've had on intelligence so far in the broader context of mahat?
So this is a very deeper thing. We have Mula Prakriti.
We have
Mula Prakriti. Okay. Mula Prakriti is this root nature. From the root nature comes the Mahat. Mahat.
Right.
And from the Mahat, it again evolves into, this is basically the Sankhya view. Okay. From this, from the Mahat evolves the different Tanmatras, the Panchaputas, the physical universe, the Tanmatras, the interface of consciousness and the physical universe, and then the cognitive organs and the physical reflective organs, And from there you again, this is the separation from the this. And Mahat acts as the kind of, what I would say, the involuted nebula, the flux in which the Mula Prakriti feeds itself so that it can flower into the universe. Okay. In Lalita Sahasranama, there is this particular process is very beautifully given.
In which place?
In Lalita Sahasranama.
Okay.
Okay. There it is, the goddess is called by different names. Mula Prakriti, Avyakta, Vyakta, Vyakta Surubini, Vyabini, Vividakara. So this is the 5 names that come in a sequence. That explains the evolution of the universe. Okay. So you have Mula Prakriti. Then you have Avyakta. Avyakta is essentially the undefined.
Unmanifest.
It is not unmanifest. That is what I have been. I was under the wrong assumption that it was unmanifest. Then when I read the Saptapanki of the Jains, they have Avyakta there. Avyakta comes as a very important thing, and they very clearly say that this is the undefined state. Now, then because, see, you have Mula Prakriti, that is one name, Avyakta, another name given to the goddess. Then you will expect that if it is unmanifest, the manifest should be the next name.
Yeah.
Right? So it should be Vyakta.
Right.
After Avyakta, you will expect Vyakta.
Yes.
But the Lalita Sahasranama says, Mula Prakriti Avyakta, Vyakta, Avyakta Swarubini.
Okay.
So there can never be a Vyakta. Vyakta is manifest, but Avyakta is undefined. So if you see a definite form, there is always an undefined or indefinable aspect associated with it. You take a flower and you study deep and deep into the flower, you will never exhaust all the aspects of the flower. You take a quark and you study, you will never exhaust all the aspects of the quark, right? The undefinable will always be there. It may be in the form of the uncertainty principle. So you have in the very fabric of the universe this uncertainty or undefinable aspect in the manifest universe. So that is why this particular name says, it never says Vyakta, it says Vyakta Avyakta. Avyakta can be there.
Wonderful.
That is the Magat. Okay, Avyakta is there as the Magat. And from there comes the Vyakta, but this Vyakta will always be accompanied by Avyakta. Avyakta can exist independently, but Vyakta will always have Avyakta.
Wow,
This Avyakta is the process intelligence that is there, that connects everything. Okay. So that's
Thank you so much for this really, really enlightening conversation. I'm sure anybody who's hearing this
It is
will
really a
take
wonderful
back a lot for
opportunity
you.
also.
Thank you. Thank you so much.